Hello and welcome to this. Oh, should we call it a third look? I don't know. It's the third time we're looking at Dido, but this is specifically a look at Dido, Queen of Carthage, by Christopher Marlowe and Thomas Nashe, or at least that's who the ascribed authors are. Some people will always question details of that. I don't really care. It is our third look at it, and we are primarily looking at it for the question of audio adaptation. And certainly the question of clarity of the text, things we might need to adapt or change, and also the perennial question for someone who has a limited budget is, of course, is this character really necessary? Can we elide some of the followers of either Aeneas and or Dido, Dido's wider court? Because there are a number of characters who I counted through. At least one of them only has 17 lines in the entire play, and it's things like that. Also questions of what to do with Dido's son as well, because part of me is thinking, can I get away with doing special effects and doubling it with Cupid, because Cupid plays the son a lot of the way through the play? I don't know. These are all questions that we will stress test to a degree, and also discuss the play at greater length. When we did our first look, we were a bit rushed through it, so I'm happy for us to be expansive and talk about the play in more general detail. I'm your host, Robert Crighton. In the room we have Lynn, we have Sarah, we have Rachel, and we have Constantine. And we may even have additional bodies popping up as we go along. But we're going to start by looking at the top of the play, and it starts off with a load of gods. So I think I will ask Constantine, can you be Jupiter? Lynn, could you be Ganymede? Sarah, can you be Venus? And I think that covers our initial... I mean, Rachel, you can be Hermes, but you don't have a lot to say. Yes, the stage direction we have is the curtain. Here the curtains draw. There is discovered Jupiter dandling Ganymede upon his knee, with all the sexual connotations that may be appropriate or inappropriate there, and Hermes lying asleep. So let's just read through this scenette. It's not the whole scene, but we'll just read till we stop.
Come, gentle Ganymede, and play with me. I love thee well. Say Juno what she will.
I'm much better for your worthless love that will not shield me from her shrewish blows. Today, when as I filled your cups and held the cloth of pleasance whilst you drank, she reached me such a rap that I spilled as made the blood run down mine ears.
What? Dare she strike the darling of my thoughts? My Saturn's soul in this earth-threatening hair that shaketh thrice makes nature's buildings quake. I vow, if she but once frown on thee more, to hang her, meteor-like, twixt heaven and earth, and bind her hand and foot with golden cords, as once I did for harming Hercules.
Might I but see that pretty sport afoot? Oh, how would I with Helen's brother laugh, and bring the gods to wonder at the game. Sweet Jupiter, if e'er I pleased thine eye, or seemed fair, walled in with eagle's wings, grace my immortal beauty with this boon, and I will spend my time in thy bright arms.
Was it, sweet wag, I should deny thy youth, whose face reflects such pleasure to my eyes, as I exhaled from thy fire-darting beams, have oft driven back the horses of the night, whereas they have haled thee from my sight. Sit on my knee, and call for thy content. Control proud fate, and cut the thread of time. Why, are not all the gods of thy command in heaven and earth in the bounds of thy delight? Vulcan shall dance to make thee laughing sport, and my 9 daughters sing when thou art sad. For Juno's bird I'll pluck a spotted pride, to make thee fans wherewith to cool thy face. And Venus' swans shall shed the silver down, to sweeten out the slumbers of thy bed. Hermes no more shall show the world his wings, if that thy fancy in his feathers dwell. But as this one, I'll tear them all for him, from him.
And we infer the plucking of a feather from Hermes' wings.
Do thou but say the color pleaseth me? Hold here, my little love, these linked gems. My Juno wear upon her marriage day. Put thou about thy neck my own sweet heart, and trick thy arms and shoulders with my theft.
I would have a jewel for mine ear, and a fine brooch to put into my hat, and then I'll hug thee 100 times.
And shall have Ganymede if thou wilt be my love.
And we have the entrance of Venus, but I'm just going to pause there before Venus actually does enter. It's an interesting question how much that comes across. It's quite fiddly stuff in many ways in terms of... I mean, you get a sense of a relationship, shall we say. But actually, in terms of what's going on, it's a tough opening, actually, for people. Sarah put into the chat, we need to add an additional name, the naming of Jupiter for the beginning. And we could even throw in, I mean, there's always a slight risk of damaging the verse, but we could always just go, my Lord Jupiter or something as a separate little mini line somewhere in there. Sarah, and then Lynn, and then Constantine.
The other thing that occurred to me after I typed that into the chat is that I wonder if you could actually... I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. I'm kind of doing it on the hoof. I'm wondering if you could actually cut the second two speeches. So you start off with Jupiter's 2 lines. I love thee well, say Juno what you will. I wonder if it would make sense if you then cut the next 2 speeches, because that's kind of all about Juno. And I was here, I think, for the second look at this play. I don't really remember that much about it, but I seem to recall that this is maybe not that relevant. And if you then went straight to Ganymede's speech, might I but see that pretty sport of, I guess that's referring to something that we cut. But like, he does actually say sweet Jupiter in that speech. Mm-hmm. And it just strikes me that all the bitching about Juno is kind of maybe not very relevant. I know she's going to appear later, but I don't seem to recall that the gods have too much to do with the main plot, other than the fact that they kind of, set it off into action. But
it is important we get across that the gods take sides in the humans that we meet. Precisely how much detail of the gods soap opera that we get in is a question. I say it's more a matter of just, for an audience's perspective, even a physical audience, if we're doing it as a stage show, this sort of stuff sort of comes at you in a way that isn't necessarily wholly clear.
Yeah, and it's very confusing. Like, it's just, you're suddenly thrown into all this kind of like, vendettas and bitching about the gods by each other, or from the gods about each other, and it's like, what? Where are we? So I'm wondering if you could, if you cut all that out, like those 2 speeches out, you could maybe then just focus on the fact that Jupiter is trying to seduce Ganymede. Ganymede's kind of up for it, but he wants what he wants in return. So I don't know, you'd kind of focus them more on the erotic side of it, and like maybe that would make it a little bit clearer, a little bit less muddy in terms of the the intentions and the motivations of what's going on, maybe.
Lynn, then Constantine.
Well, I'm going to kind of respond to Sarah's meditation and then say what I was going to say. I feel like it might be important to leave the Juno stuff in. I don't remember this play in detail, but in the overall story, Juno's kind of the bad guy. She's the one that is Aeneas's enemy, and wants him to fail, because he's Venus's son, and Venus has been caused nothing but pain in her life. So, and people who were familiar with the story, which I think many people were in the early modern period, the Dido and Aeneas story comes up again and again in popular culture. So I think maybe Juno is jealous and sort of chronically pissed off is maybe relevant.
I think it is a question of relevance. It's a question of clarity, I suppose, is the issue here. You know, because this is your audience's opening gambit, and I just see an awful lot of people going, huh?
Yeah, and what I was going to say about like we have the name Ganymede right away, so we know who that is, but most people now aren't familiar with who that was. You could probably wedge in a Jove easier than a Jupiter because it's only one syllable. But the other thing is, I think that with your audio, you could do something to indicate that the Jupiter is supernatural. A little reverb, a little EQ to deepen the actor's voice, to make him sound kind of booming and supernatural. I think you could actually indicate his divinity with some audio effects.
It's also, you know, if we could indicate, you know, with the line, I know it damages the line slightly, but, you know, say my wife, Juno, what she will, you know, you by association, as long as you have a reasonable knowledge. I mean, it seems because Juno will appear later on in the text, and has one scene, which is a significant scene, and I do wonder whether we can transpose or use a little bit here just to introduce the two of them having a tiff. Or something. That may be a step too far, but we will look at burn that bridge when we come to it. Constantine.
Well, a few things. I mean, again, I agree with Sarah. We could cut a lot of this. I mean, I find a lot of it unnecessary. Two other things that I'm interested in. How did the audience respond to Jupiter and Ganymede? I mean, the issue is I could see how sensitive it could be. Maybe it's more sensitive now than it was then. I don't know. And another thing, it's interesting how they mix Roman and Greek gods. So we have Jupiter and then we have Hermes instead of Mercury, which I guess was a common thing to do. But again, I don't see much purpose for this first scene. I mean, cut it out or alter it in some way.
I mean, it is important, and some of the I don't know if the relationship with Ganymede is exceptionally important. I mean, Jupiter's Juno's beef with Jupiter goes back all the way. I mean, you know, the idea that it's you know, it's all about Ganymede. Yeah. Probably not. And yeah, it's interesting what that particular moment is doing. And of course, we will not see either of these characters again.
Yeah.
You know, they are an opening batsman.
Why Ganymede? Why not somebody else? I mean, we have so many different people to choose from. Why Ganymede?
Sarah.
Marlowe.
I seem to recall, because I think I played Venus when we did the second look, I seem to recall that the main beef that goes on between the gods is between Venus and Juno, and that is the kind of heavenly action that drives the plot. I could be wrong about that. I might not be remembering this properly.
They are the ones who are primarily now engaged in the action as the play goes on.
Yes.
Once these two exit, they do not reappear.
Right. So then I think maybe the Ganymede and Jupiter thing, you know, could definitely be cut down, but I think it's kind of I think it would be quite good to keep a little bit of it because it kind of sets the tone. It sort of sets this kind of very eroticized tone for the play, which again, I don't really remember that much about it, but you know, I'm remembering the story rather than the play, but this is a story about someone who is so mad for someone else, you know, is so madly in love with them that when they are then left, they throw themselves on a pyre. And
spoilers for anyone who doesn't know the ending.
Yeah, sorry. If you don't know the story, well, like if you don't know the story, then you're kind of lost already, probably. But like, you know, so, and you know, Dido may have other reasons for doing that we'll discover, you know, in this play version. But like, I think that kind of erotic, highly eroticized opening could be really, really effective as a sort of background to the story that's going to unfold. But I'm not entirely sure that we need quite so much of it, especially if Ganymede and Jupiter are going to disappear.
I think the thing is, in a stage production, it functions in a very different way because, of course, especially the original production, you would have two boys, presumably one much older than the other, which creates a whole series of questions and issues about what this text is doing. Whereas, of course, we'd be doing something slightly different, and it's a question whether that effect is in play or not. And it's not so much, I don't have a problem with it being here, I don't have a problem with Jupiter or Ganymede, I just have a problem with clarity of what is being said and whether it's coming across. And at the moment, I'm not getting that clarity from it. But that might be my fault or my problem, which may be something that just a bit of work and maybe just a few fairly minor judicious cuts just to clarify what they're actually talking about. I mean, Hermes is going to be a sound effect, isn't it? Flapping wings. Pair of rubber gloves going in front of the that was a gesture not to do on video. And back to Lynn.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to sort of reinforce Sarah that I think, what this scene is doing is partly Marlowe just kind of boundary pushing, but it's also, it introduces the themes of transgressive passion and love triangles, which is what this is all about, and it places this framing tells us that the humans in the story are not in control. It's not a soap opera. It's that they aren't in control of the narrative, that they're pawns in the gods' game. And if you want to keep that theme, you need to keep the supernatural frame.
Yes, Constantine.
It's interesting. I'm reading some of the notes, and how young is Ganymede?
Exactly.
Because it says here Ganymede is portrayed as a young but precocious boy. I mean,
I don't know where you're getting that particular note from.
It's an annotated version of the text, but I'm wondering. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, I mean that's not necessarily authority, but yes, it probably was blighted by a young and precocious boy. But we don't. That's not necessarily textual. That's an inference.
Yeah, I think that in the early modern period and in the classical period, Ganymede was envisioned as like an adolescent.
Yes.
So this is creeper pedo stuff. This is
Well, yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, let's gather a little more data. I mean, it's we're sort of dancing our way into the text, and maybe running before we can crawl. But that's fine. That's the process. So they've had their little dandle. They've given away his wife's wedding jewellery, which is a very important. Rachel put that in the chat. That's a very important detail of the giving of the jewels. Sound effect of jewels, clinkle, 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 clank. But at this point, Venus enters, and Venus really does need to make an entrance, I think, here. So, enter Venus.
Aye, this is it. You can sit toying there and playing with that female wanton boy, whiles my Aeneas wanders on the seas and rests a prey to every billow's pride. Juno. False Juno, in her chariot's pomp, drawn through the heavens by steeds of Boreas' brood, made Hebe to direct her airy wheels into the windy country of the clouds, where, finding Aeolus entrenched with storms and guarded with 1,000 grisly ghosts, she humbly did beseech him for our bane, and charged him drown my son with all his train. Then 'gan the winds break ope their brazen doors, and all Aeolia to be up in arms. Poor Troy must now be sacked upon the sea, and Neptune's waves be envious men of war. Epeius' horse to Aetna's hills transformed, prepared stands to wreck their wooden walls, and Aeolus, like Agamemnon, sounds the surges, his fierce soldiers to the spoil. See how the night, Ulysses-like, comes forth and intercepts the day, as Dolon erst. Ay me! The stars surprised, like Rhesus steeds, are drawn by darkness forth Astraeus' tents. What shall I do to save thee, my sweet boy? When as the waves do threat our crystal world, and Proteus, raising hills of floods on high, intends ere long to sport him in the sky. False Jupiter! Reward'st thou virtue so? What? Is not piety exempt from woe? Then die, Aeneas, in thine innocence, since that religion hath no recompense.
Content thee, Cytherea, in thy care, since thy Aeneas' wanderings fate is firm, whose weary limbs shall shortly make repose in those fair walls I promised him of yore. But first in blood must his good fortune bud, before he be the lord of Turnus' town, or force a smile that hitherto hath frowned. 3 winters shall he with the Rutilize war, and in the end subdue them with his sword, and full 3 summers likewise shall he waste in managing those fierce barbarian minds, which once performed poor Troy, so long suppressed, from forth her ashes shall advance her head, and flourish once again that erst was dead. But bright Ascanius, beauty's better work, who with the sun divides one radiant shape, shall build his throne amidst those starry towers, that earth-born Atlas groaning under props. No bounds but heaven shall bound his empery, whose azured gates encased with his name shall make the morning haste her grey uprise, to feed her eyes with the engraven fame. Thus in stout Hector's race 300 years the Roman scepter royal shall remain, till that a princess priest conceived by Mars shall yield to dignity a double birth, who will enturnish Troy in their triumphs.
How may I credit these thy flattering terms, when yet both sea and sands beset their ships, and Phoebus, as in Stygian pools, refrains to paint his tresses in the Tyrrhene main?
I will take order from that presently. Hermes, awake, and haste to Neptune's realm, whereas the wind god, warring now with fate, besieges the offspring of a kindly loins. Charge him from me to turn his stormy powers, and fetter them in Vulcan's sturdy brass, that durst thus proudly wrong our kinsman's peace.
Exit Hermes. Flap, 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 flap.
Venus, farewell, thy son shall be our care. Come, Ganymede, we must about this gear.
Exeunt Jupiter and Ganymede.
Disquiet seas, lay down your swelling looks, and court Aeneas with your calmy cheer, whose beauteous burden well might make you proud, had not the heavens, conceived with hell-born clouds, veiled his resplendent glory from your view. For my sake, pity him, Oceanus, that erstwhile issued from thy watery loins, and had my being from thy bubbling froth. Crichton, I know, hath filled his trump with Troy, and therefore will take pity on his toil, and call both Thetis and Cymothoe to succour him in this extremity.
And there we will pause take stock. I think once again, for the narrative clarity, we do have again a certain sidetracking into a number of gods that is not wholly helpful. So Venus comes in and goes, you there with the wanton boy, and Aeneas out there, Juno stuff, and then we go off somewhere else. And It's just sort of, let us list places and people from mythology. And I just go, I've no idea what half of that meant. If I'm honest. I mean, it's lovely verse. And
It's all Greek to you.
yeah, it's certainly Roman to me. So it's yeah, it's. I mean, again, in a production, I probably wouldn't be being, full scale production. I probably wouldn't be quite so mean to this. But I say, as an opening gambit, it's tough. It really is tough. Welcome, by the way, Alan, who hopefully computer issues means that you are fully now in the room in some fashion and can join us to read in a moment.
I'm here, sir. Sorry I'm late, sir.
That's all right.
Got held up on the way, sir.
Yeah, the traffic on the internet was murder. Because there's some really nice stuff in here. But yeah, again, it all just feels a bit much. Sarah.
Yeah, I think what you said about you'd be kinder to it if you were doing a stage version. I think there wouldn't be a problem with a stage version because you'd have them there. You'd have Ganymede and Jupiter cavorting, and Ganymede extracting jewels from him in return for hugs, and then you'd have Venus bursting in and saying, "Get off your couch and do something about my son," and it would kind of, the audience would have all the physical body language to kind of see what's going on, even if they weren't quite getting it. But I think for audio, a lot of this has to be, well, I would be tempted anyway. I would be tempted to cut a lot of it, not all of it, because I do think it's important that we have the basic framework of the gods. But I think it could be cut down. Beautiful though the verse is, you do need a certain amount of clarity. And just because it's just such a weird opening, this, because one of the kind of the main godly protagonist who has caused all this, Juno, isn't here yet. So it's kind of weird that everybody's talking about her, or not talking about her, but about what the effects, the outcome of what she's done, of the decisions she's made. And she's not actually there, which does make it a tricky start. So I would be sort of tempted to kind of keep the gods, but cut them right down, and then get into the action of of Aeneas and and the sea and all that stuff as quickly as possible.
And also, just for those who may be bristling at the idea of us doing damage to these plays, remember that when we do record audio adaptations, we do actually record the full text completely uncut as part of the process. That is available then as a very rough recording, so that you can listen to it. But we then produce a version that we think will be listenable to someone who hasn't done the work in advance, who just want to enjoy an audio drama. So you hopefully will get the best of both worlds, but this is very much our thing about going, someone who doesn't know a thing about this play, come in, want to just listen to it. How do we present them the most accessible version without doing too much? We're trying not to add things or change things too much, but maybe edits and just minor clarifications so that people know what's going on. Lynn.
One of the first things, very early things I learned from Beyond is that my instinct was, we've got a drama that's all long speeches. That's perfect for audio. And Rob's like, actually, no. That long speeches are actually more successful on stage, where the audience has something to look at. And what's really important about long monologues is how the people on stage are reacting to it. That's how those work. Long speeches on audio are actually kind of momentum killers. So, I just remember that moment going, oh yeah, you're totally right. Now that I think about that. And already Jupiter had a couple of long, very pretty, very flowery speeches. But for an audio production, I think at the very least we need to cut those long speeches way down. But the question of whether the supernatural, whether the divine frame is really necessary at all. I mean, I think that's when you really need to think about it for an audio production.
Well, also, for a stage, it's not a very long play, but certainly if you wanted to produce a fringe version of this with a very small cast, you could probably remove the gods. It does create some tricky bits with because the Cupid is quite active in the text, but you could do that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that, but it might be an option that someone might feel doing. For us, it's not too difficult. Most of these gods are, because we can add a bit of reverb, and Jupiter can double as somebody else. It's not too much of a leap for a lot of these people. Anyway, I think we've got to the nub of our issue there. I haven't made any definite decisions as to what might be true. That's going to take a lot of deciding. Actually, that's going to take a lot of playing with to decide what is the best median length for that. Okay, let's go into what I hope is more surer ground. So Venus is mid-speech. When we have the entrance of Aeneas, I'll ask Rachel to read Aeneas. Alan, if you could read Carthage, Achates, let's call the whole thing off, and Lynn Ascanius, please. But we'll go from Venus. What do you see?
What do I see? My son now come on shore? Venus, how art thou compassed with content, the while thine eyes attract their sought-for joys? Great Jupiter, still honoured mayst thou be for this so friendly aid in time of need. Here, in this bush, disguised will I stand, while my Aeneas spends himself in plaints, and heaven and earth with his unrest acquaints.
You sons of care, companions of my course, Priam's misfortune follows us by sea, and Helen's rape doth haunt us at our heels. How many dangers have we overpassed? Both barking Scylla and the sounding rocks, the Cyclops' shelves and grim Ceronia's seat. Have you o'ergone and yet remain alive? Pluck up your hearts, since fate still rests our friend, and changing heavens may those good days return, which Pergama did vaunt in all her pride.
Brave Prince of Troy, thou only art our God, that by thy virtue frees us from annoy, and makes our hopes survive to coming joys. Do thou but smile, and cloudy heaven will clear, whose night and day descendeth from thy brows. Though we be now in extreme misery, and rest the map of weather-beaten woe, and yet shall the aged sun shed forth his hair, to make us live unto our former heat, and every beast the forest doth send forth, bequeath her young ones to our scanted food.
Oh, I didn't give out an Ascanius. Did I? Yes, I did. Lynn, muted at present.
That's the problem, I was muted. Father, I faint. Good father, give me meat.
Alas, sweet boy, thou must be still a while, till we have fire to dress the meat we killed. Gentle Achates, reach the tinderbox, that we may make a fire to warm us with, and roast our newfound victuals on this shore.
See what strange arts necessity finds out. How near, my sweet Aeneas, art thou driven?
Hold, take this candle, and go light a fire. You shall have leaves and windfall boughs enough, near to these woods, to roast your meat withal. Ascanius, go and dry the drenched limbs, whiles I with my Achates rove abroad, to know what coast the wind hath driven us on, and whether men or beasts inhabit it.
And exeunt Ascanius and others.
The air is pleasant, and the soil most fit for cities and society supports. Yet much I marvel that I cannot find no steps of men imprinted in the earth.
Now is the time for me to play my part. Oh, young men, saw you as you came here any of all my sisters wandering here, having a quiver girded to her side and clothed in a spotted leopard's skin?
I neither saw nor heard of any such. But what may I, fair virgin, call your name, whose looks set forth no mortal form to view, nor speech beways aught human in thy birth, Thou art a goddess that deludest our eyes and shrouds thy beauty in this borrowed shape. But whether thou the sun's bright sister be, or one of chaste Diana's fellow nymphs, live happy in the height of all content, and lighten our extremes with this one boon, and to instruct us under what good heaven we breathe as now, and what this world is called, on which by tempest's fury we are cast. Tell us, oh tell us that are ignorant. And this right hand shall make thy altars crack with mountain heaps of milk-white sacrifice.
Sorry, I was muted. Such honour, stranger, do I not affect? It is the use for Tyrian maids to wear their bow and quiver in this modest sort, and suits themselves in purple for the nonce, that they may trip more lightly o'er the lawns and overtake the tusked boar in chase. But for the land whereof thou dost inquire, it is the Punic kingdom, rich and strong, adjoining on Agenor's stately town, the kingly seat of southern Libya, whereas Sidonian Dido rules as queen. But what are you that ask of me these things? Whence may you come, or whither will you go?
Of Troy am I, Aeneas is my name, who, driven by war forth from my native world, put sails to sea to seek out Italy, and my divine descent from sceptred Jove, with twice 12 Phrygian ships I ploughed the deep, and made that way my mother Venus led. But of them all, scarce 7 do anchor safe, and they so wrecked and weltered by the waves, as every tide tilts twixt their oaken sides. And all of them, unburdened of their load, are ballast with billows' watery weight. But hapless I, God wot, poor and unknown, do trace these Libyan deserts, and all despised, exiled forth Europe and wide Asia both, and have not any coverture but heaven.
Fortune hath favoured thee, whate'er thou be, in sending thee unto this courteous coast. Ha! God's name, on! And haste thee to the court, where Dido will receive ye with her smiles. And for thy ships, which thou supposest lost, not one of them hath perished in the storm, but are arrived safe, not far from hence. And so I leave thee to thy fortune's lot, wishing good luck unto thy wandering steps.
And exit Venus.
Achates, 'tis my mother that is fled. I know her by the movings of her feet. Stay, gentle Venus, fly not from thy son. Too cruel, why wilt thou forsake me thus, or in these shades deceived my eyes so oft? Why talk we not together hand in hand, and tell our griefs in more familiar terms? But thou art gone, and leavest me here alone to dull the air with my discoursive moan.
And they exit. I mean, we've got it's helpful stuff for the audio there of my mother is fled. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. I know her by the movings of her feet. I mean, she's got a very peculiar gait as his mother. I don't know. She always exits doing the moonwalk or something. It's yeah, interesting. A much more straightforward set of scenes there. I've been noting minor one-line trims when they sort of go over the top. It's like, Venus saying, well, so where are we, Venus? Well, this is the land. It is the Punic kingdom, joining on again a stately town, the kingly seat of just tell us where you are. Some of those can go. So there's little things like that. The introduction of Ascanius, the young lad, doesn't say a lot, but is quite structurally important. We've got lighting of a flame, so I put in an SFX potential cue there. And it's interesting, actually, Venus's line from actually the... I've got 2 different punctuations of one of her lines. I'm sort of looking at, that changes the sense. So I'm dancing around with some of the punctuation, because there aren't many issues, but there are some interesting things. But we still have an awful lot of just getting out the mythological dictionary and just layering it in and putting that in there. So yeah, That felt fairly straightforward, actually. There wasn't anything that felt extraneous or, for that matter, confusing. They all sort of explain who they are. They explain their situation. She explains that they're all fine. It felt pretty straightforward. Any additional thoughts on that one before we move on? Constantine. Would you have any music for the audio? Potentially. It depends basically on what we feel it needs. It's a case of, if we're recording this live, which is sort of the plan, live there probably wouldn't be. There might be some live sound effects, but we probably wouldn't, because we're trying to get a relatively clean record of takes. So we wouldn't want to layer too much over it. That doesn't mean in the edit that we wouldn't add additional cues. So it's a sort of 6 of one and half dozen of the other kind of situation. At the moment, I'm thinking the sound of the waves in the background would be added here in post, and maybe the odd seagull. I don't know. Sarah.
I'm wondering if you could do something with wind for Venus, like like when you're walking down a beach and the wind sort of whips the top layer off the sand, and you get that quite distinctive sound, that sort of whooshing sound. Like you could have a whooshing in at in the first place when she kind of interrupts Jupiter and Ganymede, and then you could have a sort of whooshing out at the end. And if it's kind of done in a rhythmical way, that would kind of maybe suggest this kind of light-footed sense of her just skimming over the ground, maybe that Aeneas then kind of references.
We could always remove the reference. I mean, I'm sort of partly thinking it's a little pathetic in that sense. "'Tis my mother that is fled. Stay, gentle Venus." I don't think we need to know why he knows it, who it is. And again, if there's a sort of, I don't want to have twinkling sort of things for gods entering and exits, but the idea of sort of a godlike wind sort of motif might be quite straightforward to record and put together. So that each god should have their own motif, like their signature sound. Yeah, so we always know it's Venus always enters with the wind, as it were, or something. I mean, technically, Hermes is, I say, the rubber gloves wings effect. It doesn't really matter for Jupiter. But Thunderbolt, like Thunderbolt crash. Thunderbolt, godlike farting, it's whatever you sort of think is appropriate for him. But he doesn't enter and exit, so I think it's important that Cupid will have a different, perhaps a motif. We'll need at least one of those. Okay, Act 1, Scene 2 is where we start getting into this question of how many additional followers do we need and how much do we need to linger on any of them. I think most of these are probably necessary, certainly for this scene. So Rachel, for this one, can you be... we're all going to be playing different parts each scene, by the way. Don't worry too much about continuity. I'll ask you to read Ilioneus. Sarah, could you be Iarbas? Constantine, Cloanthus. And Alan, could you be Sergestus?
Yes, sir.
I think that's everybody for this scene. Very short scene. They all enter, as it were, and they say words.
"Follow, ye Trojans, follow this brave lord, and plain to him the sum of your distress."
"Why? What are you, or wherefore do you sue?"
"Wretches of Troy, envied of the winds that crave such favour at your honour's feet, as poor distressed misery may plead. Save, oh save our ships from cruel fire, that do complain the wounds of thousand waves, and spare our lives, whom every spite pursues. We come not, we, to wrong your Libyan gods, or steal your household lairs from their shrines. Our hands are not prepared to lawless spoil, nor armed to offend in any kind. Such force is far from our unweaponed thoughts, whose fading wheel of victory forbids all hope to harbour near our hearts."
"But tell me, Trojans if you be, unto what fruitful quarters were ye bound before that Boreas buckled with your sails?"
"There is a place, Hesperia, termed by us an ancient empire, famous for arms, and fertile in fair Ceres' furrowed wealth, which now we call Italia, of his name, that is such peace long time did rule the same. Thither made we, when suddenly gloomy Orion rose and led our ships into the shallow sands, whereas the southern wind with brackish breath dispersed them all amongst the wreckful rocks. From thence a few of us escaped to land. The rest, we fear, are folded in the floods.
Brave men-at-arms, abandon fruitless fears, since Carthage knows to entertain distress.
Aye, but the barbarous sort do threat our ships, and will not let us lodge upon the sands. In multitudes they swarm unto the shore, and from the first earth interdict our feet.
Myself will see they shall not trouble ye. Your men and you shall banquet in our court, and every Trojan be as welcome here as Jupiter to silly Baucis' house. Come in with me. I'll bring ye to my queen, who shall confirm my words with further deeds.
Thanks, gentle lord, for such unlooked-for grace. Might we but once see Aeneas' face, then would we hope to quite such friendly turns as shall surpass the wonder of our speech.
And they exit. Okay, so this is where we get to our first of, are these characters really necessary question. Could the Ilioneus and Sergestus be elided probably together into one person? Did they feel like distinctly different people at all? Not really. I'm not even sure about Cloanthus, Frank. Who's Cloanthus' son? Is he a Trojan or is he one of the city?
Yes, he's a Trojan prince.
Right, so, yeah, we got 3 Trojans talking to Iarbas, and I'm kind of feeling we've got maybe 1, maybe 2 for effect, but also everybody else just at the mic going, oh, yeah, we're Trojan. So, yeah, I'm starting to feel my thesis of getting rid of at least one of them. There may be a structural reason why we need so many of them, beyond, packing out the stage. It makes sense in a stage sense. It's fine for us to refer to lots of Roman Trojan lords as well later on. We don't need to worry about that, because if they're just referred to as someone in his company, then that's going to be okay. A couple of odd bits. Again, it's like we're heading to Italy. We didn't get. It's such a roundabout way to say it, really. Again, it's sort of sometimes you just go, yeah, it's just a few too many lines there. I'm just going, just a little trim here, a little trim there, and also just such weird terms as well. Some of the places and the names they're bringing up, and just going, I know my mythology okay, but I've no idea who some of these people are supposed, or what you're referencing, and it's sort of like going. There are limits. Sometimes, yeah. We shall see. But yeah, just salami edits at the moment here, and just eliding characters. Does anyone say anybody's name in that scene?
Don't think so.
No, I think it's important that we Iarbas' name needs to be mentioned. Ideally, get his name in.
Iarbas is the foreign prince who's in love with Dido. Is that right?
Yeah, he's important, shall we say? Whereas none of the other characters here, all we need to do is identify them as followers of Aeneas.
Courtier 1 and Courtier 2. Yeah,
that's all they really matter as. Rachel, then Alan, then Sarah.
But do the Trojans know who Iarbas is yet?
No, we would have to find a way. I mean, it might be fine and might not feel too weird that if because he's going to enter in a bit once again anyway, as everybody sort of comes on in the next scene and it all gets a little untidy. But that's sort of fine. But that was Act 1. That's sort of. I think we've arrived, and I think it's always that problem of making sure initial exposition lands reasonably clearly, and then we can figure out where we are. So Act 2 is where things get a little more heated, as it were. Rachel, you can stay being Aeneas, I think, and Alan, you can remain being Carthage, Chartes, etc. And Lynn upon return will be well, I'll just do Ascanius. Ascanius so doesn't count really. You can't get rid of Ascanius, but they don't say very much. Little boy. I'm an adult, definitely. So we'll just do this little moment before everybody else enters and see how we go. So, Act 2, Scene 1, Aeneas, Achates, Ascanius, and others.
Where am I now? These should be Carthage walls.
Why stands my sweet Aeneas thus amazed?
O my Achates, Theban Niobe, who for her son's death wept out life and breath, and, dry with grief, was turned into a stone, had not such passions in her head as I. Methinks that town there should be called Troy, yon Ida's hill. There Xanthus' stream, because here's Priamus, and where I know it is not, then I die.
And in this humour is Achates too. I cannot choose but fall upon my knees and kiss his hand. Oh, where is Hecuba? Here she was wont to sit, but saving air is nothing here. And what is this but stone?
Oh, yet this stone doth make Aeneas weep. And would my prayers, as Pygmalion did, could give it life, that under his conduct we might sail back to Troy and be revenged on these hard-hearted Grecians which rejoice that nothing now is left of Priamus. Oh, Priamus is left, and this is he. Come abroad, pursue the hateful Greeks.
Means Aeneas?
Achates, though mine eyes say this is stone, yet thinks my mind that this is Priamus. And when my grieved heart sighs and says so, no, then would it leap out to give Priam life. Oh, were I not at all, so thou mightest be. Achates, see, King Priam wags his hand. He is alive. Troy is not overcome.
Thy mind, Aeneas, that would have it so, deludes thy eyesight. Priamus is dead.
Ah, Troy is sacked and Priamus is dead. And why should poor Aeneas be alive?
Sir, sweet father, leave to weep. This is not he, for were it Priam, he would smile on me.
Aeneas, see, here comes the citizens. Leave to lament, lest they laugh at our fears.
And we have the arrival of some people. It's a really interesting scene, this. I think we have discussed this, certainly in the first session, quite a lot, is that Aeneas is having PTSD flashbacks to Troy. And it's such an interesting scene. There's so much to do there. It's really interesting. I really like that. Again, it's Achates is sort of there to be a foil to Aeneas, and is functioning as the second in command who we need to talk to, and that is helpful. Sarah.
Yeah, I just wonder if you could do some kind of fun things with Foley effects here, or sound effects at least. Like you could have seagulls, and then you could have the seagulls morphing into screams, maybe, and you could have, I don't know, a bell, like, you know, a clock tower sounding the hour in the distance, and then it turning into like the thunder of, I guess they wouldn't have had cannons, but no, would they have had cannons? I don't know.
We could always reset it in a more modern idiom anyway.
Yeah.
That's fine. We haven't discussed that element.
So that you're actually so that you've got these kind of very tranquil kind of provincial sounds of a prosperous city that kind of morph into the sounds of war, just to kind of convey his PTSD to the listeners, maybe.
Yeah, that might be an option. Alan.
Yeah, I was just looking back at the previous scene, and I think it does need some additional material in there. Maybe only a line, but something to distinguish Iarbas from the three wandering sailors, courtiers or whatever they are, just to make it clear that he is from t'other side of the page, as it were.
Hmm.
Quite how one does it without severely mangling the scansion, I'm not sure, but
Oh, yeah. I'm not worried about the scan. I'm just worried about, you know, stereotypes and racism and such, but just like a slight little accent.
Well, I mean, or just yes, that he's moving, and because they do say this brave lord, and maybe there's a sound effect for him, but he's got a train that follow him, and then it's there's a moment. I think a lot of that can be massaged just in the way it's performed and things. Constantine.
Well, if he's a king, maybe we can have some sort of royal sound effect because he is a king of the Gaetulians or whatever, right? So of North Africa, maybe some sort of generic royal sound of some sort to indicate that he's a king.
That if he's got a train following him, and he's moving in some state, so that opens the scene. In fact, it's a good way of marking the beginning of the scene, and so that when they run to him, this brave lord, that may work. Okay. We have got them having their moment. We have them speaking, and we have a lot of people technically now speaking, or potentially at the same time. Yes. So, Sarah, could you read Leonis? I'll read Sergestus because I just assume that they're just not going to matter, and Constantine Cloanthus. And let's see how this little reunion happens, because of course they say, here come the citizens, whereas indeed these people now enter. Everyone as you were, so Aeneas, Rachel, and Achates, Alum.
Lords of this town, or whatever style belongs unto your name, vouchsafe of ruth to tell us who inhabits this fair town, what kind of people, and who governs them, for we are strangers driven on this shore, and scarcely know within what clime we are.
I hear Aeneas's voice, but see him not, for none of these can be our general.
Like Ilonius speaks, this nobleman. Ilonius goes not in such robes.
You are Achates, or I am deceived.
Aeneas, see, Sergestus, or his ghost?
He names Aeneas. Let us kiss his feet.
It is our captain, see, Ascanius!
Long live Aeneas and Ascanius!
Achates, speak, for I am overjoyed.
Oh, Ilonius, art thou yet alive?
Blessed be the time I see Achates' face.
Why turns Aeneas from his trusty friends?
Sergestus, Ilonius, and the rest, your sight amazed me. Oh, what destinies have brought my sweet companions in such plight? Oh, tell me, for I long to be resolved.
Lovely Aeneas, these are Carthage walls, and here Queen Dido wears the imperial crown, who, for Troy's sake, hath entertained us all, and clad us in these wealthy robes we wear. Oft hath she asked us under whom we served, and when we told her, she would weep for grief, thinking the sea had swallowed up thy ships, and now she sees thee. How will she rejoice?
Oh, see where her servitors pass through the hall, bearing a banquet. Dido is not far.
Look where she comes. Aeneas, view her well.
Well may I view her, but she sees not me.
Okay, we'll just pause there briefly. So yeah, we've got everyone reunited. I think we can definitely go for just two sea captains who are in that separate group. I don't think we need three. I think most of these calls out of "you are such and such, yeah, long live." I think we could tidy that up if we decided to. I mean, it's not a guarantee. I mean, if it's a very small role, then we can hide Sergestus in other people. But I feel that we need to, and that means the Troy contingent 4. And that feels like a reasonable number of bodies to be primary characters as, whereas 5 feels excessive within our probable budget. So, any other thoughts on that? It was all quite straightforward. I felt there was nothing in there. I saw nothing in there that made me cry. So that makes me happy. Okay, Sarah, could I ask you to take on a Dido? I'll take Ilioneus from you. We have the... does Iarbas say anything in the short term? No, nobody really says anything in the short term, as it's very quickly going to turn into a two-hander. Okay, enter Dido, Anna, Iarbas, and Train.
What stranger art thou that dost eye me thus?
Sometime I was a Trojan, mighty queen, but Troy is not. What shall I say I am?
Renowned Dido, 'tis our general, warlike Aeneas.
Warlike Aeneas, and in these base robes. Go, fetch the garment which Zacchaeus wore. Brave prince. Oh, sorry. Did you want to read that, Rob? That's a.
Oh yes, there's
direction.
a stage direction hiding. Naughty stage direction. There we are. I'll play around with the placement of that in a moment. Yes, carry on. Oh yeah, there's an attendant who brings a garment. There's some garment stuff. It was in the previous line.
Brave prince, welcome to Carthage and to me. Both happy that Aeneas is our guest. Sit in this chair and banquet with a queen. Aeneas is Aeneas, were he clad in weeds as bad as ever Iris were.
This is no seat for one that's comfortless. May it please your grace to let Aeneas wait, for though my birth be great, my fortune's mean, too mean to be companion to a queen.
Thy fortune may be greater than thy birth. Sit down, Aeneas. Sit in Dido's place. And, if this be thy son, as I suppose, let him sit. Be merry, lovely child.
His place beseems me not. Oh, pardon me.
I'll have it so. Aeneas, be content.
Oh, madam, you shall be my mother.
And so I will, sweet child. Be merry, man. Here's to thy better fortune and good stars.
And raises a toast, drinks in some fashion.
In all humility, I thank your grace.
Remember who thou art. Speak like thyself. Humility belongs to common grooms.
And who so miserable as Aeneas is?
Lies it in Dido's hands to make thee blessed? Then be assured thou art not miserable.
O Priamus, O Troy, O Hecuba.
May I entreat thee to discourse at large, and truly too, how Troy was overcome? For many tales go of that city's fall, and scarcely do agree upon one point. Some say Antenor did betray the town, others report 'twas Sinon's perjury. But all in this, that Troy is overcome, and Priam dead. Yet how we hear no news?
A woeful tale bids Dido to unfold, whose memory like pale death's stony mace beats forth my senses from this troubled soul, and makes Aeneas sink at Dido's feet.
What? Faints Aeneas to remember Troy, in whose defence he fought so valiantly? Look up and speak.
Then speak Aeneas with Achilles' tongue, and Dido, you Carthaginian peers, hear me. But yet, with Miramotus' harsh ears, daily inured to broils and massacres, lest you be moved too much with my sad tale. The Grecian soldiers, tired with 10 years' war, began to cry, "Let us unto our ships, Troy is invincible, why stay we here?" With whose outcries Aristides, being appalled, summoned the captains to his princely tent, who, looking upon the scars we Trojans gave, seeing the number of their men deceased, and the remainder weak and out of heart, gave up their voices to dislodge the camp, and so in troops all marched to Tenedos. Where when they came, Ulysses on sand essayed with honey words and turned them back. And as he spoke to further his intent, the wind to drive huge billows to the shore, and heaven was darkened with tempestuous clouds. Then he alleged the gods would have them stay, and prophesied Troy should be overcome. And therewithal he called false Sinon forth, and made compact of craft and perjury. whose ticing tongue was made of Hermes' pipe, to force 100 watchful eyes to sleep, and him, Ephaeus, having made the horse, with sacrificing wreaths upon his head, Ulysses sent to our unhappy town, who groveling in the mire of Xanthus' banks, his hands bound at his back, and both his eyes turned up to heaven as one resolved to die, O Phrygian shepherds hailed within the gates and brought unto the court of Priamus, to whom he used actions so pitiful, looks so remorseful, vows so forcible, as wherewithal the old man overcome, kissed him, embraced him, unloosed his bands, and then, pardon me.
Nay, leave not here, resolve me of the rest.
Oh, the enchanting words of that base slave made him to think Ephaeus' pine tree horse a sacrifice to appease Minerva's wrath. The rather for the one Laotian breaking a spear upon his hollow breast was with 2 winged serpents stung to death. Whereat, aghast, we were commanded straight with reverence to draw it into Troy, in which unhappy work I was employed. These hands did help to hale it to the gates, through which it could not enter, 'twas so huge. Oh, had it ne'er entered, Troy had stood. But Priamus, impatient of delay, enforced a wide breach in that ramparted wall, which 1,000 battering rams could never pierce. And so came in this fatal instrument, at whose accursed feet, as overjoyed we banqueted, till overcome with wine, some surfeited and others soundly slept. Which, sign on viewing, caused the Greekish spies to haste to Tenedos and tell the camp. Then he unlocked the horse, and suddenly from out his entrails Neoptolemus, setting his spear upon the ground, leapt forth, and after him 1,000 Grecians more, in whose stern faces shined the quenchless fire that after burnt the pride of Asia. By this the camp was come into the walls, and through the breach did march into the streets, where meeting with the rest. Kill, kill, they cried. Frighted with this confused noise, I rose, and looking from the turret, might behold young infants swimming in their parents' blood, headless carcasses piled up in heaps, virgins half dead dragged by their golden hair, and with main force flung on a ring of pikes. Old men with swords thrust through their aged sides, kneeling for mercy to a Greekish lad, who with steel pole axes dashed out their brains. Then buckled I mine armor, drew my sword, and thinking to go down, came Hector's ghost, with ashy visage, bluish sulphur eyes, his arms torn from his shoulders, and his breast furrowed with wounds, and that which made me weep, thongs at his heels, by which Achilles' horse drew him in triumph through the Greekish camp, burst from the earth, crying, Aeneas, fly, Troy is afire, and the Grecians have the town.
Oh, Hector, who weeps not to hear thy name?
I'm just going to pause there just to give Rachel an in-breath, because basically this is Aeneas slaughter story time. Hi, for those who want their entertainment, a lengthy exposition on a massacre.
And that's only the short version.
Yeah, this is it's a chunky bit. I mean, I'm sort of torn a bit, because there's part of me thinking, I think the way we'd record it is we'd just record it as story time. We'd have some reactions in the audience occasionally, and then probably in post I'd be looking at, okay, maybe we're going to again, following Sarah's thing earlier about the background noises, and maybe having some other people recording, Aeneas fly, Troy is a fire, that sort of thing to sync in with it. I don't think, especially if we're doing this as a live performance, I would try and sync that. I wouldn't try and do that live. I think that's a level of pain that I don't think I'd attempt. I might do it for a live show, fully rehearsed and over many weeks. I think this is a very effective speech, actually. I think it works very well. I don't actually have a problem with its length per se. And I kind of would like to just give it its due, actually. And also, I suspect the actor doing it would quite like. Don't step on my big set piece speech. Thank you very much. I will suggest cuts mid-rehearsals rather than the other way around. Lynn.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a little earlier the long speeches on audio can be tough, but I don't really see any way to just not do this. I mean, partly because it's like plucked straight from Virgil, which was the playwright's primary source. It's like he tells this long narrative of the fall of Troy. It's like an inset narrative. It's like that's how epics worked. Um, and partly it's just it is really has great storytelling. I think a good director and a good actor could spend some time on this, breaking it into chunks, into episodes, so that the attitude and the pace and the tone of each chunk is a little bit different. So instead of one long speech, it kind of feels more like 5 shorter speeches. I'm not a big fan of being too pausy, but I think some pauses for the storyteller to basically kind of collect himself, because retelling this is kind of traumatic, might be effective. So there's ways to break it up. That's something you want to think about as you rehearse it. But yeah, like the length per se, it isn't something we feel like, oh, we just need to cut it for the sake of cutting it.
Yeah, no, and again, there isn't actually that much, fat on this. Actually, it's telling a story. It's a long story. There's lots of but it's not going off on, and he was the son of this, and this god this, and it's not doing that. It's telling the story in a fairly direct way, and there's not actually much you could cut without just stopping the story at some point. And I don't think, and of course, when you're doing something like this, you do some bits fast to pay for the bits you're going to do slow when you're getting into your, there are lots of technical tricks that we'd be doing with that from an actor's point of view. Alan, then Sarah, then Rachel.
Yeah, I think there are 2 possible ways of dealing with background sound during that. One is to go with the fact that there is the assembly of people, and so you're going to get oohs and ahs and maybe clinking of goblets or whatever. The other one would be to actually follow on what Sarah's talked about in the chat, of basically Aeneas who's got PTSD, and you actually use battle sounds at the appropriate cues, so that he's actually within his head getting the noises of slaughter and whatever.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sound cue cliche, but it's the thundering of hooves blurring into everything else. I mean, it's a very doable thing. Sarah, then Rachel, then Lynn.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the practicalities of this. I think it would be fun to have the sounds of battle in the background in the post-production version. You couldn't do that in a live recording, but I'm just thinking for the benefit of the audience at the live recording, as you can't actually do much with noises, with Foley in the live recording, you could have some fun with the visuals, for your live audience. And, again, it's relying on battle cliches, but why not, lean into them, just bring up, as his speeches go on, bring up the orange light and have a bit of dry ice that starts as a wisp and then gradually kind of, collects as he's recounting more and more of the story. And then, the orange light, flicks off and goes back as just a single white spot as when Dido interrupts him and brings him back into the present. And then the orange light, gradually comes back once he starts to tell his story again. I mean, it's all kind of fairly tried and tested stuff, but it would convey, while during the live recording, it would convey kind of what, his kind of mindscape that you could then actually create with sound in post.
Oh no.
Rachel, then Lynn.
I like the idea of breaking the Aeneas' speech up, and there's lots of places where he could pause and change tactic, of course. I wonder if in those pauses, having Dido, urge him on, adding a couple of, because, or have her react in some way might help move it along.
Yeah, I mean, we do have, obviously, Dido does interrupt at very set areas, but maybe there's more Dido reaction to be had. And again, the point of this speech, to a degree, is building a relationship between Dido and Aeneas. We've got, oh, end, Aeneas, I can hear no more, which means he then does another 100 lines, or 50 lines, or whatever it is. We've got various little bits from Dido throughout, and we could expand on that more. How could Aeneas escape their hands? With one bound he was free. I'm not actually going to ask us to go through all of that to the end, because it's not really part of the exercise. But we will go from the end of it when Dido, I die with melting Ruth. But I'll go to Lynn first.
Oh, Sarah said something about an earlier scene of, like, the distant sound of seagulls as we're standing on the beach, and could those cries morph into human screams as Aeneas, does one of his earlier speeches. That was really cool. You could do something similar here, where the clinking of goblets shows up as the clash of swords later on in the speech. So you could take your everyday sound effect, and they start being interleaved with the war sound effects. People mumbling at the table become soldiers yelling. Something like that. Like a really skilled sound designer could do cool things with this in post.
Constantine.
It's interesting. I'm wondering if Ganymede in the beginning with Jupiter, and Ganymede is sitting on Jupiter's knee or whatever. It seems to be mirroring Ascanius, because Ascanius also sits on the throne. So I don't know what the playwright is doing, if they're mirroring some sort of weird comparison there. So because I was trying to figure out, why is Ganymede there? What's the purpose of Ganymede, right? So, and then when I see Ascanius is sitting, Dido says you can sit on the throne as well. I'm wondering if they're. It's interesting also, Venus, when she spoke to Jupiter, she was really harsh, calling him, "Oh, you and your effeminate boy." So there's something happening there. So I'm trying to figure out why Ganymede is there.
Yes, yes, the idea that that there's a deliberate doubling effect going on here in slightly different ways. I don't know if we get that in audio, but I think that's one for the stage. Definitely. Okay, we're going to take it as read that Aeneas has traumatized everybody, and we're going to just see where we go. We're going to have a little bit of a close to the scene. I'll ask Constantine, could you just read Iarbas? We're going to go from Dido's I die with melting Ruth. For the love of God, stop telling me these terrible stories. Dido, take it away.
Do we have an Anna?
Oh, we don't. I'll do Anna. That's fine. Oh, Lynn, you do Anna. Yeah, go for it.
Something to keep me awake.
Yeah, Anna, who hasn't said anything yet. That is interesting structural. Doesn't matter at this stage.
I die with melting Ruth. Aeneas, leave.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, we skipped all the long speeches. Bottom of the long speeches.
Yeah. Dido drinks. I can hear no more. We've said that.
Yeah, it's after that.
Oh, yeah, I die with melting Ruth. Okay.
Do you want me to give you the line again?
Yeah, please.
I die with melting Ruth. Aeneas, leave.
Oh, what became of aged Hecuba?
Yeah, okay, I found it. Sorry. How got Aeneas to the fleet again?
But how escaped Helen, she that caused this war?
But Katie, speak. Sora hath tired me quite.
What happened to the queen we cannot show. We hear they laid her captive into Greece. As for Aeneas, he swam quickly back, and Helena betrayed Deipherwas, her lover, after Alexander fled, and so was reconciled to Menelaus.
Oh, had that ticing strumpet ne'er been born. Trojan, thy ruthful tale hath made me sad. Come, let us think upon some pleasing sport to rid me from this melancholy thoughts.
Right, okay, we've done that little moment. Pretty much everybody's going to exit. What I quite like about that is Dido says, no more, don't tell me any more, don't tell me any more. Oh, what happened next? And it's Aeneas who doesn't want to say any more, and Achates does that bit. I'm tempted to make a few minor trims there, actually, just to get on with it. But yeah, I do quite like the sort of suddenly everyone's really into the story. Everyone in the room, what happened next? What happened next? What happened next? I can't tell you anymore. Number one, tell the story. He just says, yeah, we don't know. We weren't there. We swam off. So we then have quite an odd little moment. Venus turns up again. And Ascanius, the little boy, is still presumably on the throne while everybody else has exited, maybe having a little nap. So Sarah asks you to read Venus. Lynn, could you be Cupid? And Constantine, be Ascanius this time. Let's say. So they all go off, and Ascanius is perhaps thinking to go. I'm just checking how authentic. No, this is an authentic stage direction. Enter Venus with Cupid at another door and takes Ascanius by the sleeve.
And child, stay thou with Dido's waiting maid. I'll give thee sugared almonds, sweet conserves, a silver girdle, and a golden purse. And this young prince shall be thy playfellow.
Are you Queen Dido's son?
Aye, and my mother gave me this fine bow.
Shall I have such a quiver and a bow?
Such bow, such quiver, and such golden shafts will Dido give to sweet Ascanius. For Dido's sake, I take thee in my arms and stick these spangled feathers in thy hat. Eat comfits in mine arms, and I will sing.
Now, we can infer a song here, but there's no guarantee there is one. There is no actual marking for it.
Oh,
Now he is fast asleep. And in his grove, amongst green brakes, I'll lay Ascanius and strew him with sweet-smelling violets, blushing roses, purple hyacinth. These milk-white doves shall be his sentinels, who, if that any seek to do him hurt, will quickly fly to Cytherea's fist. Now, Cupid, turn thee to Ascanius' shape and go to Dido, who, instead of him, will set thee on her lap and play with thee. Then touch her white breast with this arrowhead, that she may dote upon Aeneas' love, and by that means repair his broken ships, victual his soldiers, give him wealthy gifts, and he, at last, depart to Italy. Or else in Carthage make his kingly throne.
I will, fair mother, and so play my part, as every touch shall wound Queen Dido's heart.
Exit Cupid.
Sleep, my sweet nephew, in these cooling shades, free from the murmur of these running streams, the cry of beasts, the rattling of the winds, or whisking of these leaves. All shall be still, and nothing interrupt thy quiet sleep till I return and take thee hence again.
And exit Venus. So, it's an interesting question here, of course, because we have the question of Cupid is now going to be Ascanius for the rest of the play for everybody else. Now, do we have someone playing Cupid for, 2 or 3 lines in this scene, and then Ascanius the actor playing Ascanius does it for the rest of the play? Or do we have it just being Cupid doing an impression of Ascanius for the rest of the play? Or do we actually literally just have the same actor playing both, and I just have two separate mics, one with a little reverb for that tiny exchange between them, or tweak the exchange so Cupid doesn't necessarily say a line there? It's lots of options. Thoughts in the room, Lynn, then Sarah.
Yeah, I would not go with the option that you switch back to the original actor playing Ascanius, doing Cupid playing Ascanius's lines. It's confusing enough. You want to make it clear to the audience that the person that Dido is interacting with in those upcoming scenes is Cupid. I kind of like the idea of they're actually the same actor, but you manipulate the sound of Cupid's voice somehow with a little echo, with a little something, so that we can hear. But the conceit is that the character in the play can't hear the difference. In fact, like giving all the gods a little manipulation, like reverb or something like that, so that we know when a supernatural being is talking. I don't know, maybe it's a little heavy-handed, but that's something I would seriously consider.
Yeah, I have got to the point in my my sound career I got a bit bored of making gods have reverb. Then there's also a point I'm not really sure what else to do. So answers on a postcard, alternative sound effects for gods, please. What treatments can we do to their voices that isn't just woo? Sarah.
It's an oldie but a goodie. Hey, if it works.
Yeah.
Stick with it. Yeah, I was just going to say one actor. I don't think you need to. I mean, yeah, you can use the reverb. You can also have an act. You know, most professional actors are capable of, especially the ones that do audio. They're capable of doing different voices. You could have a slightly different voice for Cupid. Slightly lower or slightly richer or something slightly thicker. Vocally, and then revert to being Ascanius, even though it's Cupid being Ascanius. I don't think it would be a problem, and I would just like save our bodies.
Well, yeah, I mean the only real problem is that when Ascanius and Cupid literally talk to each other at one point, and I'm tempted to just tweak the Cupid line and make it Venus answering on his behalf. And that would save that problem. All you need to do is then have, would be, in the background while it's doing that and something like that. And I have to say that is the appeal of this, is that, you just have a slightly treated voice for Ascanius from this point onwards, because it's Cupid being Ascanius. And that would just be, that would save an actor. Because Ascanius is such a non-role, actually, as Ascanius. The act, if it's Ascanius, you don't want to be playing Ascanius, because Ascanius is rubbish. Because, it literally turns up and has a nap and says, "Hi, Daddy.
I'm hungry." Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is real, how old is Ascanius as well? So, okay. Some of that's just going to be a logistical question, certainly in terms of doing it live, how we do that. But that's very much an option. Okay, Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, this is probably something you discussed already in the first look.
We didn't discuss a lot, to be honest.
Okay, this is more of a textual thing than, or an interpretation thing, I guess, more than a strictly audio thing. But that scene, I found that scene deeply creepy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know if it's supposed to be. I think maybe because he is her. Ascanius is her, she says nephew, but isn't he actually her grandson?
Yeah, but the terms were interchangeable.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, theoretically, this is quite a sweet little scene, but in practice, it's just like, oh, that's some proper child kidnapping going on there, and this whole thing of taking him off to a grove and bribing him with sweets is like, oh, that is really quite creepy. And I don't know if you'd actually want to lean into that. It gives the gods. I mean, the thing is, the gods have so much power. We were saying earlier that the whole point of this god framework is to show that I think Lynn was saying it, that the humans aren't in charge of their own lives. and if you lean into that creepiness, it really does, I think, highlight that and make it clear that actually these people are kind of all doomed because the gods are just going to do what they're going to do.
Yes, I think that's absolutely in the play. I mean, Cupid is not a nice, it's not the Valentine's Day card idea of Cupid. We've done so many plays where Cupid is, I mean, very different interpretations of Cupid, but they're all pretty dark because this idea of being, compelled to love in this excessive, overly passionate way is something that early modern period just finds very dodgy. And it's not a good thing to be in love on that level. They don't like it. They do not like that arrow up them, as it were. Constantine, then Sarah.
Well, I mean, we start off with something creepy. I mean, we have Jupiter with Ganymede, so I think this is continuing the creepiness of the gods, right? I mean, we are just playthings to them. So, I mean, I think it's just continuing the fact that the gods do whatever they wish, and we have no power over them.
Lynn. Oh no, Sarah, then Lynn. Sorry, I said Sarah.
I mean, Cupid is a creepy little fucker always, but Venus as well in this play. She is so creepy. I think the way she lures Ascanius in, and then also that speech where she's like, "Oh yeah, go on, just prick Dido's breast with your arrow, and then she'll fall madly in love with him, and then she'll fix his ships, and she'll feed and water his men, and then he can go to Italy, or he could maybe stay here, whatever." There's just no. Her treatment of Dido here is so callous. It's just. I don't know. She's giving me the willies, this Venus, and she doesn't always in plays, but she's super creepy.
Yeah, I did a comedy skit version of this play once, and it was basically Aeneas phoning up Venus's ship repair service and just going, and Venus saying, "Yes, well, all we'll just get a queen to fall in love with you and she'll repair your ship." And thinking, "Sorry, what? Sure this is going to end well? It's going to be fine. It's fine. There's nothing they won't burn themselves." And yeah, it's really quite excessive for what the gods are trying to do here, which is, get him off to fulfill his destiny, as it were. Lynn.
Yeah, the classical world was the gods are deeply amoral, and the authors here seem to understand that. But the gods are not just in the classical world at all. They basically act exactly as human beings would if they couldn't die and never suffered consequences, which is not well. So is one of the reasons I'm so obsessed with early modern drama is that it was created in a supposedly deeply Christian culture, but much of the drama takes place in a really like indifferent universe. There is no justice. So I just find that really interesting, and certainly this play has that going on, that the gods are not just, the gods are not good. They have their own ends, and they don't really care who they hurt. And the line that Sarah mentioned, then about, then if she'll fall in love with him, she'll do anything she wants, including re-rigging his ships, so that he can go on his mission, or maybe he'll stay here. That's actually such a weird line. I don't remember enough about the Aeneid to remember what Venus's attitude was towards Aeneas's destiny. Aeneas's destiny is it's like the dominant force in the epic. It's like he's got to go to Italy and found Rome. Gotta happen, gonna happen. Doesn't matter who gets hurt in the meantime. And Venus is like, oh, one way or the other. And so I don't know if my tendency might be to cut that line about, or maybe he'll stay here and be king. There's just a lot more hanging on that line, if you kind of know the backstory, which many of the audience would. We
are first two acts in, and structurally, we know this is a show designed to have acts, because whilst you can just about make the transition between Act 2 and Act 3 work, it's pretty much Cupid has exited and has 6 lines to come straight back on again. So it just about functions all the way through, but a little break is sort of useful. So there's a little bit of massaging to get into the next bit, but it's not really a massive structural problem. But the play does pretty much now pivot on what Cupid is doing to people now that the plot's been set up. I don't think there's that many other drivers to this plot left. There is one more subplot to come in Act 3. And it's interesting structurally what this play is doing. Act 1 is setting up the basic god situation and getting Aeneas in the right place. Act 2 is introducing Dido, enmeshing people. But, nobody's dangerously in love with anyone yet. Cupid's on the scene. But, Dido and Aeneas are not matched. I mean, I think she's moderately impressed, and she's certainly very sympathetic. And maybe there's kindling available for love, but nobody's fired off any arrows yet. And yeah, we've had a set piece for Aeneas to really say, "Hi, I'm an actor." But Dido so far hasn't done a lot character-wise. Some reasonably good stuff there. So I'm sort of hopeful as we go forward that we will be able to pick into that a little bit more, and indeed we will. There will be much more back and forth between the two of them. We've got the ghost of an idea of tweaking some of the doubling, tweaking some of the number of characters down a tad, and some ideas about what to do with the gods. But there is still more to do, and as I said, it'll probably take a couple of sessions to finish looking at this play in reasonable detail. So final thoughts around the room, however, about the play overall. Okay, we skipped about half of Aeneas's long speech for coverage period reasons. But yeah, just general thoughts about the play overall, and just that sense of it as a play, and as well as, of course, the adaptive question that is always in the back of our mind for these sessions. Sarah,
I am really enjoying Dido's characterization. She hasn't said a lot, but what she said. The thing that struck me about it is that all her lines could have been said by a king. She's above everything else. She's regal. She's this kind of regal, apparently quite just ruler. She's empathetic. She's sensible of the fact that these men have been through this terrible trauma. Well, 2 traumas, because of course, there was the sack of Rome, but then there was the sea storms. So, like, she's treating them with kindness and respect and empathy. But above all else, she's a monarch. She's coming across just in the few lines that she's had as someone who is just a really sound ruler, and I just really like that, because we know what's going to happen. We know that once she gets pricked by Cupid's arrow, that it's all going to go out the window, and she's going to be kind of following Aeneas around. So I think it's kind of important that contrast is kind of allowed some room, and I just really like that it's, to me, it seems to be in the text. If this wasn't the story of Dido and Aeneas, and this was just some random ruler giving shelter to some shipwrecked soldiers, then all of her lines so far could have been lines delivered by a king. She has this kind of asexual quality to her almost, but she's very strong. And she's very regal, and I just really enjoy that, and I'm really glad that the playwrights made her that way, obviously on purpose, to kind of then contrast with what happens to her later. But I'm just really enjoying it.
I mean, it's interesting, her first line. What stranger art thou that dost eye me thus? Because, of course, her arrival is obviously dramatic. It's this question, a question that we will at some point need an answer to is, does Aeneas love Dido or care in any, what is, where is the direction of travel in there? Because obviously we know Dido will get hit by an arrow. But where is Aeneas? Is Aeneas actually torn, or is he just trying to be polite about his exit? And there are big questions on that because I'm not sure the text actually really gives us an answer. And that's something we can look at next time. But it does seem from that line, it's this question of, he's looking at a queen. A cat may look at a queen, as we have established from John Hayward. But whether Aeneas can look at a queen is a totally separate matter. And that is something that is interesting because he's all humbleness itself. I can't sit on the throne. But he's clearly giving her the eye. And you don't do that to queens necessarily. He's not necessarily at that moment showing the correct deference. Is that just because he's a soldier who's standing there looking at someone and he's not impressed, or is that because he goes, "Ooh, a queen, I like you," kind of thing? And yeah, that's a question that. Because I think Aeneas can go either way. He can go into someone who's very withdrawn and very separate, and which fits the PTSD reading. But also he could be genuinely torn. Discuss later on. Constantine, then Sarah.
Yes. Oh, a few things. When we have the regal characters like Dido, the Queen, and Iarbas, you can either have some sort of sound effect, or you actually call them Queen Dido or King Iarbas. You just add a title. I mean, that could solve the problem right there, right? And so we have regal characters. They might have different sound effect or something, and then we have the gods. What I find interesting in the beginning, if we remove Ganymede and give some of Ganymede's lines or whatever, or just have Venus and Jupiter and remove Ganymede, I think it should still work. As to the Aeneas, there's also Odysseus and Circe, and Odysseus was married, and then there's the question is, was he in love with Circe? So I think Aeneas, part of him is in love with Dido, but I think the fact that he's a Roman, or he's supposed to find Rome, I think because based on the Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas is supposed to have put duty or his country in as a priority and leave everything behind. So, for the Roman propaganda, that's what he should do. Now, obviously, this is not mythology. It's not the poem. It's a play. So, for modern audience, I think we seem to believe that he does love her in some way, or I think because that in this context, in the Renaissance England, I think that would be important for the. So it's also the anguish that he has to tear himself from her. So
yes,
Romans. 5 cents for it.
Yeah, pre-Roman Stoicism, because he's there to found, on some level found Roman foundations are a mixture of myths that don't quite all mix together. But yes, the idea of that sort of Roman detachment is perhaps part of what the character is supposed to be doing. Sarah.
Yes, I just while you were talking about how, raising the question, is he smitten with her or not? I mean, that's something to dig into with the actor in the rehearsal. But one thought that just did occur to me while you were saying that is that I think he should be, whether he's actually in love with her or not from the moment he sees her, he should certainly be smitten with her in the sense of just kind of overawed by her, like have his senses overwhelmed by her. And I had this image that came into my head of her appearing, when she makes her big entrance. And this is obviously something that's more for staged than audio, but I think you could create the effect in the, because I mean that's the joy of audio, is creating those images in your listener's mind. Have her literally burning up the stage, burning up everybody's eyes when she comes on, because she is so magnificent. She's a sun queen, to borrow from Louis XIV. She's magnificent, she's radiant, she's burnished, she's glittering. She comes on, she's so full of majesty and like fire, like in terms of her energy, that he is just like, he can't do anything but stare at her. And then she gives him this, kind of quite haughty line back about, who are you looking at me? Before she knows who he is. And then that would actually, I'm deliberately using these kind of fiery descriptors because, of course, this is how she ends as well in a more literal sense. So if we have this sense of her just burning up the room that she comes into, because she is so mighty, because she is so magnificent, and then she goes on this just incredibly tragic journey of just being brought low by this love, which isn't even real love. That's the real tragedy of it. It's been inflicted upon her. It's this kind of mad crush that the gods have inflicted upon her. This incredible burning woman is brought down to nothing by the callous actions of the god, and then does literally end up in a pile of ashes. So I just think that could be a really fun way of interpreting her character in production.
Other final thoughts? I won't necessarily go around the room. Lynn, and then I'll go to Alan.
Yeah, what I have been thinking is what we've been talking about for the last few minutes is that any production, audio or staged, is going to need to think a lot about what is the relationship between Dido and Aeneas. Are they attracted to one another on their own at first meeting, or is that completely a concoction of the gods? The thing about the epic that I remember from, I haven't actually read it in quite a few years, is one of the striking things about it is how opaque Aeneas continues to be from beginning to end. You never really know what he cares about, what he wants, what he feels. He never tells Dido he loves her. In the poem, when she confronts him about his imminent departure, he says something about, "If I had my way, I'd be back in Troy with my wife who's now dead." So how does he feel? I don't think that the reader needs to know, but I think the actor needs to know. And then you kind of decide, does the audience need to know? And I think we definitely want to know about Dido. Is she completely sort of self-contained, this sort of dazzling presence that Sarah was talking about, who is 100% manipulated by forces outside of her control? Or does she feel a little of that human desire when she sees this very handsome, very magnificent man, that has undergone all these trials and survived them? Does she feel a little bit of that on her own as a human being? Like, so what do you want to do with that? I think you can go either way, that human desire on its own plays a part and the gods just sort of ramp that up. They just sort of amplify that. Or the other way around. She really doesn't feel anything for him. She has every intention of keeping her vow to her late husband to remain unmarried until cosmic forces derail her plans. But you kind of got to decide, I think, as a production, what's going on there.
Alan.
Yeah, I'm slightly handicapped because I missed the first section because of technical issues. Most of the storytelling seems to work to me, but there's still a lack of clarity on who is who, which I think is easy to solve if you're doing a staged production with costume indicators. In a an audio version, that's a rather more tricky issue to try and sort out. So I'm not quite sure how one can do it. I referred to the fact that you've got Iarbas, who is obviously a person of status, but so far we've only had that one interaction of him with the captains. And I've felt a lack of clarity as to who the heck was who.
Well, it's one of the things is that we've got these various background artists effectively so far. I mean, Iarbas will become a character in Act 3. I think it's fair to say at the moment he's just some guy, and I think if they're just some guy, it doesn't matter. And we've got quite a few some guys. We've got some Trojans. We know they're Trojans. We don't need to know who they are. It doesn't really matter. We need to know who Aeneas is. We need to know who his son is. We'll eventually need to know who Dido is. We'll know that pretty clearly. We know who Venus is. Everybody else sort of doesn't matter. They're just people saying words. So I don't think that's a fundamental problem. And to say, Iarbas will effectively get his own proper introduction in the next act, looking forward. Back to Alan, then Constantine.
Yeah, the other question, you may have covered this in your intro. What's the date of this play originally?
Oh, off the top of my head, somewhere. I think it dances around a bit, depending on your point of view, but 1580s, mid 1580s. I think some people have placed it somewhere.
1592.
Across and see
the final one was 1592, I believe, around there.
Right.
The final part.
It moves around depending on who you ask.
So we're basically at peak Elizabeth.
Oh, it's definitely Elizabethan, whichever case. Yeah, but he's dead before it's Jacobean.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but it strikes me that what you could have is a situation that Dido is almost an incarnation of Gloriana, in terms of the grandeur. Would be a way of approaching it, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and look how bad things would have turned out if our queen had fallen in love with somebody.
Yeah,
that really lines up with the political.
That's the sort of logic I'm working on, Lynn. And you could also take some costume notes, possibly from that.
Yes,
you know, the Armada portrait or whatever.
Yeah, so especially if it's about 1588 is the date, the medial date I was looking at there, but it does dance about
which
it.
Is bang on Armada, isn't it?
Yeah, and to say for a live stage show, yes, you absolutely could go in that direction. That would be quite fun to have. Traditionally, it's been suggested that it was written a lot earlier, that it might even be a student piece. I don't think anyone really thinks that anymore, but I could be wrong on that, because these things change with the wind. Someone will write a thing and make it all, and it doesn't fundamentally matter to our production whether it's a year or two earlier or later. Constantine.
Well, and the other problem is with the mythology. There is a lot of mythology. What part do you cut out and still make this understandable? I think a lot of the mythology might confuse or slow down the play. So it should be surgically altered, removed, or just leave a bit of it intact. Because for the audience at this time, it could have been, it was appropriate, understandable, but today's audience might be problematic.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there are sort of two elements there. One is, yes, it can be judicious cutting. Some of it is also you just chuck it over your shoulder in part. It's literally you're chucking things and you're just moving straight on because nobody's getting it and it's fine. And the audience will tune into the, and it's a matter of how much you tune the audience to and what you don't. And yeah, there isn't necessarily an absolute option for it, because I think even for the audience that would be watching this, even then, some of the references are really obscure. I mean, even for then. I mean, classical literature was much more in the popular lexicon than it is now. It was the basis of all sorts of things that people, could actually tune into, in ballads and other sources. And, this stuff was out there in a way that today, less so. And it's a lot harder.
And I just wanted to add it because I'm fascinated with this. When people actually read plays on their own at around this period, I find that's related to my thesis as well. I mean, obviously, this play is different when it's read, different when it's watched in a theater, and of course, different when it's heard on audio. So we have three different ways of approaching the play. So obviously, if it's read, then people have the luxury of looking up the different references and allusions. But of course, it's difficult when it's an audio.
Yeah. This is us grouping in the general direction of a cut of the text for a live performance. I say, in terms of recording it, the aim will always be to record a complete text, as well as, I say, a more played around one. And of course, then moving towards doing fuller productions and just constantly, because, you know, the odds on us not doing Dido quite a lot is quite, you know, that's quite a high probability, you know, because it'll sell. It'll sell, and it's not too big a cast, and there are different ways of doing it. So if you don't like our version, don't worry, there'll be another one along 5 minutes later, so that'll be fine. Anyway, this is our initial look at the first two acts. We will return and look at some more acts. I don't know how many sessions this will take, probably 3 off the top of my head, but we shall see. It might only be 2. Because we may dance through some issues later. All that remains is to thank all the wonderful readers and contributors for all their wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.